Good afternoon, delegates. Welcome to our afternoon session. I invite us to take our seats as we get started. Thank you very much. We resume this afternoon session of the plenary, where we'll be presenting and seeking approval of reports from the Executive Committee. In my capacity as the chairman of the Executive Committee, I would now like to present to the Assembly the various reports of the Executive Committee. Over the past few days, the Executive Committee has met on several occasions in order to address all items on the agenda that pertain to the Executive Committee, and we have satisfactorily concluded our deliberations on most of the agenda items as reflected in the reports that have already been distributed. I would like to commence with the report on agenda item 11, relating to annual reports of the Council to the Assembly, and which is contained in Working Paper 629. I present this report to the plenary for approval. Are there any comments or interventions? Not seeing. Thank you. There being none, the report is approved. Next, we have the report on agenda item 20 relating to the No Country Left Behind initiative, which is contained in Working Paper 630. I present this report to the plenary for approval. Are there any comments or interventions? New Zealand.
Thank you, Mr. President. With respect to Working Paper 630, we would like to suggest a slight amendment to reflect a key point in our paper and the subsequent discussion, namely that the recommendations arising from the PCID study must be practical and proportionate, especially if small Pacific Island states are to be largely responsible for the implementation. New Zealand would therefore like to add an additional sentence at the end of paragraph 20.11 to read, being mindful of the challenges faced by most small Pacific Island states, New Zealand encouraged the authors of the PCID study to ensure its recommendations are practical, proportionate and cost-effective. Thank you.
New Zealand, could you just repeat that a little bit slower, please?
Sure. Being mindful of the challenges faced by most small Pacific Island states, New Zealand encouraged the authors of the PCID study to ensure its recommendations are practical, proportionate and cost-effective.
New Zealand, one more time for emphasis.
Sorry, everyone. Being mindful of the challenges faced by most small Pacific Island states, New Zealand encouraged the authors of the PCID study to ensure its recommendations are practical, proportionate and cost-effective.
Thank you. 3 times is a charm. Accepted. Are there any other comments or interventions on working paper 630? There being none, the report is approved. Thank you. Next, we have the report on agenda item 21 relating to the United Nations 2030 Agenda, Sustainable Development Goals, and which is contained in working paper 631. I now present this report to the plenary for approval. Are there any comments or interventions? There being none, the report is therefore approved. Next, we have the report on agenda item 22 relating to the resource mobilization and voluntary funds, and which is contained in working paper 632. I present this report to the plenary for approval. Are there any comments or interventions? There being none, the report is therefore approved. Thank you. Next, we have the report on agenda item 23 relating to the Technical Assistance Program, and which is contained in working paper 613. I present this report to the plenary for approval and invite any questions, comments, or interventions on this paper. There being none, the report is therefore approved. Thank you. Next, we have the report on agenda item 24 relating to the technical cooperation policy and activities, and which is contained in working paper 640. I now present this report to the plenary for approval. Are there any questions, comments, or interventions? There being none, the report is therefore approved. Thank you. Next, we have the report on agenda item 25 relating to the ICAO Civil Aviation Training and Capacity Building, and which is contained in working paper 637. I present this report to the plenary for approval and invite any comments or interventions. There being none, the report is therefore approved. We now move to the report on agenda item 12, and before you is the report on agenda item 12, which takes into account all the discussions and the comments made on the floor. We thank those delegates that have clarified comments by sending their input to the Secretariat. A key point from the Executive Committee discussions was that the committee welcomed the adoption of a new declaration on aviation safety, aviation security, just checking if you're listening, on aviation security as a means of demonstrating states' political will to strengthen aviation security worldwide. The Executive Committee agreed on amendments to Assembly resolutions, which are now proposed for adoption as 12/1, addressing cybersecurity in civil aviation, 12/2, consolidated statement on continuing ICAO policies related to aviation security, 12/3, declaration on aviation security, affirming global commitment to strengthening implementation. Furthermore, the Executive Committee requested that ICAO continue to work on the development of tools to enhance security awareness and security culture, making it a priority and designating 2020 as the year of security culture. As there are no other outstanding issues, I propose that we approve the report, and I now invite comments or interventions on this report. Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have a comment regarding 12.51. While discussing the draft report text in working paper 596 in the executive, the proposal of Canada was not accepted. However, it is now reflected in this report. The original paragraph 12.51 of working paper 596 should be kept unchanged, as this new modified text changes the substance significantly. Thank you.
Accepted. Thank you, Turkey. Yes, that's accepted. Are there any other comments or interventions? Canada?
Mr. President, can we have a clarification of what has been proposed to that text? I'm not sure I understood.
Secretariat?
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. The request by Turkey is to go back to the original draft of 12.51 as it was presented for the report on item 12. And there were submissions in writing after the discussion that didn't represent the views of all the states, and so the Secretariat agrees to go back to the original draft as Turkey requested. Thank you.
Canada?
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to state that we support the language as presented in the working paper under 1251. Thank you.
Oui, c'est encore moi.
Yes, me again. The text which appeared in 1251 as it stood apparently did not reflect the discussions that took place at the Executive Committee, and the modification presented is a mistake. And during the discussions in the Executive Committee, there was opposition to Canada's proposal, and it was not accepted. So the proposal is to go back to the original draft of the report and not the version that you presently have before you.
Thank you. France?
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon to colleagues. This is also our recollection of the Technical Commission discussions. There was an ACI proposal and a Canadian proposal on this paragraph, and that was different from the one presented in the text currently before us. And those proposals were opposed by my delegation in Mexico. And the President of the Council also spoke on this. So I think to be faithful to what actually transpired, the proposals and the opposition, I think the original paragraph strikes a good balance. Thank you.
Thank you. Portugal.
Thank indeed need to be consistent with what was discussed at the executive committee, and as I recall and remember, this the text that I have in front of me was not the result of that discussion. So for the benefit of consistency, we do agree with the position of the Secretariat. Thank you very much.
Thank you. ACI.
Thank you, Chairman. Since our name was mentioned, I would just comment that we would in fact agree with Turkey, because we think that the draft that we've now got is actually worse than the suggestion that we had to improve it. So we agree with Turkey to go back to the original text. Thank you.
Thank you. Canada.
Thank you, Mr. President. So just to be sure that what we are approving, can we ask to see again the original text, because I'm not sure there are all kind of versions we're talking about. So we should have in front of us what we are approving. Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, Canada, we're going to recall that. May I suggest that we will come back to this item once we can project it. Thank you. We will then proceed to the next item, and we will revert to 12. For consideration today is the report on agenda item 13, which takes into account all the discussions and the comments during the committee meeting. In addition to noting the report on the implementation and activities of ICAO Universal Audit Programs, the Executive Committee endorsed the 3 streams of work to evolve the Universal Safety Oversight Program and the recommendations arising from the review recently conducted of the Universal Security Audit Program by the Secretariat Group on the USAP CMA or SSG. The Executive Committee expressed support for the work carried out by ICAO's audit programs and recommended to prioritize the work on their evolution. The Executive Committee agreed on amendments to Assembly Resolution 13/1, the Universal Safety Oversight Audit Program and Continuous Monitoring Approach, which is now proposed for adoption. As there are no outstanding issues, I propose that we approve the report, and I now invite questions, comments, or interventions. France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. On 1319, on USAP CMA audits, we made proposals that were not taken up, and nobody opposed them during the session. So for efficiency's sake, I'm not going to run through all our proposals, but just a couple of them, which are the most important. So in the third or fourth line after confidence. We need to delete effectiveness of the audit methodology and replace it with the International Aviation Security System. And then a little bit higher up, after it was highlighted that these recommendations, we should insert focus.
Operational implementation of Annex 17 standards and should be implemented.
Thank you, Franz. Accepted. Finland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a short proposal for addition to 13.5. As we, Finland, on behalf of the European Union and its member states, were co-sponsoring this paper, we would like to see that reflected in the beginning. So just add by Finland on behalf of the European Union and its member states to co-sponsors. Thank you.
Thank you. Accepted. Colleagues, we will now revert to agenda item 12. Secretariat.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I'll read it in English.
Donc, le 12.12.51, previous redaction was recalling the conclusions of the HLCAS/2 High-Level Conference on Aviation Security, and in keeping with the GACEP priority outcomes and relevant ICAO Assembly resolutions, and also UNSCR 2309, the committee agreed that outcome-focused and risk-based principles could inform the development of proposed amendments to Annex 17-security provisions and associated best practices. Full stop. To that end, the committee requested that the Aviation Security Panel consider the development of tangible methods to recognize and integrate such principles in decision-making processes as appropriate, with the goal to further strengthening the effectiveness, efficiency, and sustainability of aviation security programs. Full stop. That was the previous redaction.
Thank you. Do we have any comments or interventions? United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to say that that was what the Secretariat has read out was also my recollection of where we had ended. So, like others, I can support the Secretariat's proposal here. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments or interventions? There being none, the report is therefore approved. Colleagues, I guess I was a little bit ahead of myself. We had also discussed 13, but I don't recall asking if there were any further comments or observations. There being none, the report for agenda item 13 is also approved. Pressing ahead, before you is the report of the Executive Committee in Working Paper 636 for agenda item 14, which takes into account all the discussions and the comments made on the floor. We thank delegates that have clarified comments by sending their input to the Secretariat. The Executive Committee agreed on amendments to Assembly resolutions, which are now proposed for adoption as 14/1, mitigation of the spread of disease through inter alia, aircraft disinfection and vector control methods, and the importance of CAPSCA, collective arrangement for the prevention and management of public health events in civil aviation for implementation, and 14/3, consolidated statement on continuing ICAO policies related to facilitation. Furthermore, the Executive Committee has proposed a new Assembly resolution, 14/2, development and implementation of facilitation provisions, combating human trafficking. As there are no outstanding issues, I propose that we approve the report, and I now invite comments or interventions. There being none, this report is approved. Next, we have the report on agenda item 18 relating to multilingualism, and which is contained in working paper 635. I present this report to the plenary for approval and ask if there are any comments or interventions on this report. Portugal.
Mr. President, when we discussed the report, we had proposed a point 35 of working paper 451. The Secretariat wrote an alternative text that it is satisfying to us. However, we would like to remove the word activities, which is in the last line of paragraph 18.3. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you. Accepted. Are there any other comments or interventions? There being none, the report is approved. Next, we have the report on agenda item 19 relating to increasing the efficiency and effectiveness of ICAO, and which is contained in working paper 633. I now present this report to the plenary for approval and invite comments or interventions. There being none, this report is also approved. Thank you. Finally, colleagues, I seek your indulgence in presenting the report on agenda item 26 relating to other high-level policy issues considered by the Executive Committee and which is contained in working paper 634. Unfortunately, the reference to this report was inadvertently omitted from the order of business that was issued for the meeting. Given our deliberations on this item have already concluded, unless there are any objections, I would also like to present this report to the plenary for approval. Are there any comments or interventions? Spain.
Gracias, señor presidente, y buenas tardes a todos.
Thank you, President. Good afternoon, everyone. Item 26. I have the text in Spanish. On page 26.4, the resolution on innovation in aviation. It's on page 26.3 in English, fifth paragraph. The Spanish text says, paragraph 5, 26.4, directs the Council to urgently consider the establishment of a high-level body with the industry to regularly provide technical advice to the Council concerning innovation in aviation. This does not correspond fully to the English version. And I would like to draw attention to the fact that this could create a risk if we talk about technical advice in the Council, because this is interference with the activities of the Air Navigation Commission. And so during the discussions on this question, my delegation would agree with creating a high-level body with industry, but it must be strategic advice, not technical advice. The technical issues are taken care of by various panels or expert groups stemming from the ANC and from safety. And so I propose to correct the text. Thank you.
Thank you. France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you to our colleague from Spain for having drawn our attention to the problem in the Spanish version of this document, because it is very clear that all of the discussion in the technical committees related to the idea of providing information at the strategic level to the Council. And so there's no ambiguity. And in the English version, of course, it should say strategic and not technical. And it's the same for the French text. And so we must align the Spanish text. And so for the Spanish version, we must replace technical with the word strategic. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, this is accepted. Brazil.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon to all. I'd like to suggest maybe that we take the urgently out of this paragraph, so it directs the Council to consider the establishment, because the urgent, we have so many other things that are urgent that it might be a little bit difficult to get it urgently done. So we should consider it and then get it on board. But I would suggest we take the urgently out. Thank you.
This was requested by other states to put urgently, so it's up to them. We don't mind, but it's up to them.
Are there any comments on that proposal from Brazil? France.
Merci.
Thank you. I don't recall that this notion of urgency was discussed during our debate in the Executive Commission. And so if we don't mention the time aspect, then there's a high risk that these things may take quite a bit of time. And so I would be very grateful to the Brazil delegation if they could review their position and perhaps consider keeping this term. Thank you.
Thank you. Cuba.
Sí, gracias, señor presidente. Simplemente tal vez para ayudar a...
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. In order to add a bit of clarification, we could delete from the text the part that says urgently. Yes, it was discussed in the executive committee. I have the papers here. It was deleted because the British delegation asked for it to be so. Thank you.
Thank you. Sweden.
Thank you, President. Sweden would like to support the intervention by France. Thank you.
Secretariat.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think the whole premise of the paper that was introduced in the Executive Committee was this was of high importance and therefore urgent. I think it also has to do with the innovation within ICAO, where we need to proceed quickly with. So in that context, I think the word urgently is very appropriate.
Thank you. Colombia.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's true that Brazil mentioned this and the urgency, and it was reflected in the final draft. Just because the word urgent isn't there doesn't mean that it can't be dealt with quickly by the Council. And so we support Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you. Italy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Italy wishes to support the idea to maintain the urgently in the resolution, in the report, because we are speaking about strategic issues, and then this appears to be very important for the ICAO to start quite soon with establishing such a kind of body in order to receive strategic advice. If we need a strategic advice, it means that it is better to have as soon as possible. Then the urgency will be established by the Council, depending on the other urgent issues. So I think that the issue put by Brazil about the other urgent issues can be dealt with together in accordance with the good judgment that the Council will put in deciding when to activate such a body. Thank you.
Thank you. Germany.
Thanks a lot. The word urgently was discussed in this group, and I think the report should reflect that, and so we support France and the others. Thank you.
Thank you. Austria.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Austria would like to support France and the other states, especially what was said by Italy, I think is very valid. Thank you.
Thank you. Australia.
Chair, to try and bring this to an end, can I prevail upon my Brazilian colleague and her supporters to suggest that it only says consider, urgently consider. So therefore, as a member of the Council, Brazil may decide, but when it's there, that may be the end of the matter. But let's try with urgently consider. Thank you, Chair.
Singapore.
Thank you, President. Singapore will support retaining the word urgently simply because technology is moving very quickly, and during the discussion under this agenda item, there has been a call for ICAO to involve the various industries and to move ahead in terms of technology. Thank you, President.
Thank you very much, colleagues. From the interventions, it appears that we have more support to maintain the text as is. And so I suggest that we maintain the text as is. With the previous intervention regarding the Spanish version and the word strategic. Are there any other comments or interventions? There being none, I then take it that this report is approved. Thank you. Colleagues, in relation to agenda item 15 relating to environmental protection, general provisions, aircraft noise and local air quality, policy and standardization. Although the executive committee has concluded its deliberations on this item, we will present the report to the plenary at the same time as the other two agenda items that pertain to environmental issues, specifically agenda items 16 and 17. As delegates are all aware, there is ongoing work with agenda items 16 and 17, which we intend to conclude in the shortest possible time. I therefore will adjourn the plenary for 20 minutes, at which time we will reconvene as an executive. As the executive committee to address agenda items 16 and 17. Thank you.